back to my channel. In today's video I want to share how I water my collection of 200 different orchids, Hoyas, and plants, and I'm going to show you how I flush my collection. And I typically spend 1 day a week thoroughly watering everything, and like 2 or 3 times a week I pop into my grow space and I top anything off that really needs watering. It takes me about 45 minutes when I thoroughly water. I water everything right on the shelves, and then like 2 or 3 times a week I spend about 10 minutes topping things off. So I try to spend as little time possible watering the plants just because I'm really busy, but I tend to do it in the morning. I should flush more often, but about every 2 or 3 months, I take the collection and I empty the shelves and I bring them here to my kitchen back there and I flush them in the sink very thoroughly. I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm not going to do the whole collection, but I'll show you how I go about flushing my orchids in Leca and sphagnum moss and bark, etc. That takes me longer. That is a whole process of about a week, and it takes me about an hour each time, so it takes me about 7 hours to flush the whole collection. And I just wake up early in the morning and divide the task, so it's not that difficult for me, because doing it in one shot is just a ton of work. But most of the time, 45 minutes once a week for a thorough water, and then I just check in on everything that dried and needs a little bit more moisture for about 10 minutes, so it's not too bad. I tend to use a lot of sphagnum moss in my mixes, so it's like a mixture of sphagnum moss and bark. This is something I learned from Miss Orchid Girl. That way when I water right on the shelves, the sphagnum moss kind of helps disperse the water and the moisture more evenly, whereas if you have just bark, it kind of falls and doesn't really water as thoroughly. So I try to add a little moss to everything I have. I use catch pots or saucers or something like that for everything. That way I could water right on the shelves so nothing is dripping everywhere. And I also have a shelf liner just in case. So with that said, let's jump right in and let me show you how I water the collection. So I'm in my kitchen, and sometimes I use a pump sprayer, but lately I prefer to use a 1 gallon watering can, and that's perfectly fine. And what I do is I take some MSU fertilizer. So I use this brand lately because it's cheaper than the Repotme brand, and I find it works just fine. And then I create a little nutrient mix with it. So I used to mess with the pH. I no longer mess with the pH, and I'm not having any issues. Check out this video right here if you want to check out more about how I adjust pH, how I measure it, and what I do to change it. But I use tap water. My New York City tap water is very low in parts per million, so I don't have to use RO water or anything like that. So I pretty much take my MSU fertilizer and I mix it in with my water. And I do this at half strength. I used to measure it. I no longer measure it. I just use half strength and it's totally fine. One thing to note is that when it is the summer or the spring, I use full strength. In the winter, I use about quarter strength to half strength, but now in the spring I'm starting to ramp it up, so I'm using half of the recommended dosage here. So I'm just going to use MSU fertilizer today, but sometimes I like to add calcium and magnesium about every 6 weeks to the mix, but we'll keep it simple today. So I flush my orchids every 2 or 3 months. We have orchids in sphagnum moss, and what I do is I run water through the pot and make sure that it's thoroughly drains through. With that said, some people express concerns about this getting too soggy. Unfortunately, if you are using sphagnum moss, if you packed it a little too tight, it can be soggy, so I try to make it as fluffy as possible. Over time it will compact, but I'm not having issues with any of my orchids in the long run. I repot them about every 2 years, and many of them have really good root growth, so I find that they dry faster than expected. So like this one in particular has a lot of root growth. I potted it very fluffy, so when I water very thoroughly, the roots kind of absorb everything. The key here is that you want to put it in the smallest pot as possible so that you have good root growth without making it too soggy, because if you have moss in a big pot, it's going to get very soppy wet and it will drown your roots. I always do fluffy try to go for a pot that's as small as it can accommodate the roots. Like this one is a pretty big pot, but we have a huge root system here. And if the pot is too big, I start adding bark, because then you do have that problem that it will pack down. So if we have a 6-inch pot or bigger, I do mix the sphagnum moss with some bark or coconut husk or something like that to keep it a little bit more airy. So let's flush these. It's very simple. What I do is I take my pots out of their decorative pot, take out the little saucers, and I run some warm water straight through the pot. And that's pretty much it. I just adjusted the flow of the water so I wasn't wasting too much water. But unfortunately, I do go through a good bit of water in this process. I try not to waste too much water though, but I let it drain, put it back in its saucer. And if this is not a Phalaenopsis, I also like to run some water through the leaves, but I don't want this to get any crown rot, so I didn't put any water through the leaves of this phal. I put it back in its decorative pot, and then I move on to the next orchid. So as I mentioned, I have sphagnum moss in a lot of these pots, and I try to use the smallest pot that I can get away with. So this is a phal with a really good root system. It does not get too soggy because there's just so many roots in there. So I just thoroughly water it. I let it drain through the pot, and then that's pretty much it. Put it back in the saucer once it's dripped through, but you can see this pot is a lot smaller. So I don't have any issues because the root system in there I know is pretty extensive. So I'd try to use the smallest pot possible if you're using sphagnum moss, if you can get away with it. If not, add some amendments. Moving on to a semi-hydro self-watering setup, I empty out the outer pot. Sometimes that water gets a little sludgy. And I find with these, you have to use a lot of water to flush them well because the leca holds a lot of salts. But I run water through the leca, and then this is a Cattleya, no crown rot. I run water through the leaves just in case there's spider mites or anything like that. And this is my way of controlling the pest population. And then what I do is I take my watering can with my nutrient-filled water, put it in the outer pot, fill it up to the top of where I need it to go, and then I put my plant right back in this pot, and it is ready to go. So it's pretty simple. It just takes me a long time to go back and forth from the grow room to the kitchen for this. So moving on to how I water the collection, this is what it looks like on a weekly basis. I take my nutrient water, which has the MSU fertilizer, and I go pot by pot, and I add a little bit of water in each pot. I've been doing this for a long time, so I know more or less how much water to add to each pot. And what really helps is, as I mentioned, we have some sphagnum moss in most of these pots, or these are semi-hydro kind of setups. If they are just bark, the water doesn't disperse as nicely or as evenly. So that's part of the reason I water, and that is something that I got from Miss Orchid Girl, and I find that it works really well. You'll notice that I have a shelf liner here. I do drip water sometimes and it falls on my shelf liner, but the shelf liner helps prevent me from getting my floors. So I find that it works well. The water does not get all over the floors too bad. And yeah, I just go from pot to pot and then move on. And then what I do after is I take my electric sprayer and I spray my orchids. So this is after I do a thorough water, or if I'm just topping things off, I just like to get my electric sprayer and run it through everything. This way I get any aerial roots, I get the humidity up, and this works pretty well for me. I repeat the process in my other shelves, but I will say that if the shelves are a little bit lower, it is an awkward angle, as you could tell here. So sometimes the pump sprayer works better. But the watering can helps me go faster, but you could see that I have to kind of like angle this and just be careful not to spill water outside of it. But I just add water little by little to each pot. Even the self-watering pots, I kind of know how much to add without overfilling it, just because I've watered them and had them in this setup for so long. And then I will repeat the process and spray them down and make sure that I get any aerial roots. After I'm done watering everything, I just repeat the same process and I spray everything down really well. I also do this, as I mentioned, if I don't have time to water, I'll just mist everything, or I'll take my electric sprayer here and then just go over any orchids that need more moisture and I just concentrate the spray on them. But this is a quick way where I could hydrate my orchids, especially if I don't have time to water. But I like to finish off by just raising the humidity and putting some water on everything, and it works really well for me. And that's pretty much it, guys. The electric sprayer helps a ton and it saves me in a bind. And we are done. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.